Please be seated. Today, we continue with the last installment of our preaching series about our baptismal promises and the discipleship goals. And today we ask you to serve your local communities and to pay special attention to people who are different from you. And this discipleship goal is based on the baptismal promise to serve all people, following the example of Jesus. Why the hell does the Lutheran Church always have to obsess about meddling in community affairs? Get the people saved and don't worry about politics. The church should be a politics-free zone. That is not a rare argument. It assumes that a separation of state and church means that the church should be a purely spiritual realm that is removed from the messiness, the division, and the confrontation that are the reality of a 21st century capitalist democracy. In our public sphere, opposing interest groups vie for power and influence to shape the destiny of our communities. And the church is one of those interest groups that try to shape our nation's destiny as it engages in public discourse and equips its people to go out into the world and to serve their neighbors. And this service is and has always been a political activity. Supporting those in need necessarily shines a light on those aspects of our community that are less perfect than others. That has always been contentious with those who support the status quo. Throughout its history, the church has never been a politics-free zone that confined itself to the realm of theology. The moment Martin Luther nailed 95 theses against the church door in Wittenberg, he entered the political realm, or better, he didn't enter it as much as he blew it up. He set fire to it, and he snuffed out the decaying life of the Middle Ages. For many of his contemporaries, the world worked just fine, and everything was according to God's plan when Martin Luther made a theological argument against the sale of indulgences. Indulgences are letters that promise a special dispensation from the consequences of sin. They would release souls from purgatory, which is a place or a state of suffering inhabited by the souls of sinners who are atoning for their sins before going to heaven. In contrast to hell, where you will burn for all eternity, in purgatory, sinners burn only for some time until all the evil and the sin is burnt off. The idea of purgatory is completely and utterly unscriptural. It's mentioned exactly 0 times in the Bible, and that is why Jesus never said anything about purgatory, nor threatened anyone with it. He did not commit anyone to purgatory, and he did not free anyone from purgatory. But in Luther's time, the purgatory was big business. The church did its best to scare the people with the prospect of purgatory and hellfire. And in the end, the people were willing to pay any price to get a way out. And the church opened her coffers and received all that cash. The influence this theology had on the life of the people cannot be underestimated. This influence on people's life makes theology a profoundly political process. And then when Martin Luther translated the Bible and the people could read it, that event had enormous political consequences because it questioned how medieval society was ordered. According to the medieval worldview, God ordained the hierarchies of society. A few he made into lords, and all the rest roamed this earth only to serve their lords. The serfs worked so the lords didn't have to. And the lords squandered the fruits of the labor of the common people and didn't care at all if their people starved. And the church blessed this arrangement because that was supposedly God's will, and it was in the Bible, and then the people read it, and it wasn't. And this understanding of God's plan ended up on the trash pile of history, beginning with Luther questioning indulgences and ending after 150 years of warfare that left Germany wildly depopulated and that in the end yielded no victor. In the following centuries, the medieval feudalism was replaced by other systems of ordering society. And at all times, the church was instrumental in shaping the political thinking of the time. In many European nations, the church became a state church, organized and maintained by the states. And even in the United States, where there is a separation between church and state, faith communities are a major factor that shape US civic life, be it Reagan's moral majority or the civil rights movement. And this is quite logical. Christians, no matter what flavor Christians they are expected to be Christians in church and in real life. You usually don't go to church on Sunday to be pious and devout and then go back to real life where you are a completely different person. According to Lutheran theology, which is reflected in the order of our worship, the people are gathered, equipped, fed, and sent out again. When you walk through the church door into the sunshine or into the Washington rain, you enter the mission field. You carry the message of God's grace through those doors into the world. There you are confronted with the inevitable tension between your secular vocation and your Christian conviction. And this will always be a struggle, as a reality of any advanced capitalist economy and God's call for your life are not always compatible. To navigate that fault line as best as we know how, that is one of the challenges of the Christian life. Being Lutheran is not about avoiding hell and getting into heaven instead. Being a Lutheran means to be gathered, equipped, and sent out into the world to proclaim the gospel of grace and of love. It means doing God's work with our hands. Through us, God reaches out to those in need. And for us, it doesn't matter who those people are. May they be sinners, may they be saints, may they be Christians, or may they call God by another name. That is completely irrelevant. But that God has put persons in need into our path, that is all that matters. We don't help those in need to earn our salvation. We think that is a futile enterprise. God's grace is a free gift from God, which frees us from the obligation to earn our salvation. But if we don't want to sit around in our church basements and twiddle our thumbs until the day we die, God's grace also frees us to serve our neighbors. Our church motto is not, let's save ourselves, or let's be holy. Instead, it is God's work, our hands. Lutherans have left the monasteries, the mountaintops and the desert caves and all the other places where humans go to separate themselves from the messiness of the world to attain holiness in splendid isolation. We have embraced the messiness of life and the idiosyncrasies of our societies. It is there in the thick of it all, where there is pain and suffering, where there's discord and strife, where God's work is needed. It's in the midst of brokenness and pain and desperation. There the agents of grace follow the man from Galilee by reaching out to those in need. In the middle of our societies, there is where we walk the talk. There we preach the gospel by what we do to our neighbors. So what Jesus do? What Jesus does tends to upset those in power. And when the powerful are upset, it gets political very quickly. And Jesus was not convicted in a religious court, but he was sentenced and executed by Pilate, a civil magistrate. We follow the example of Christ when we give public witness to his all-inclusive and gracious love for all people. When in that spirit we serve our local communities, we might upset some people. That happened to Jesus. That happened to Martin Luther, and it happened to Martin Luther King Jr., and it happens to many who put God's call to love their neighbors before custom, sentiment, and culture. So be it. Here we stand, and bring it on. Amen.